but I'd argue and say again, that's what art is. Art is we set up a set of rules, we have a construct, and then we break those rules. Because once we know how the rules play and we know how to paint, we paint differently, and now we've set up new rules. That's what I think the beauty of art is.
Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 73, recorded January 2023. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan. We listen to their fandom story, and we try to figure out why we all love this show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode number 73. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Here's your spoiler warning. As we recorded this, we were at the end of Prodigy Season 1.5, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the vocal, vain, and vital, but never vaudevillian M5 Multitronic Unit. Say hello to the listeners, M5.
M5 Multitronic Unit. All systems available and at your command.
All right, computer, show me the announcements.
Announcements ready.
This is an independent Star Trek podcast. If you'd like to show your support, the best way you can do that is just to follow us wherever you're getting your audio. We're on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. The actual episode today is only about an hour and 12 minutes long, but if you look at your podcast player or whatever device you're listening to us on, you'll see that the episode runs longer than that, and that's because there is a cornucopia of lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of the episode. You can enjoy it or not, as you choose. At the end of every episode, my guest faces my Kobayashi Maru lightning round. That's 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they have to give us their answer. And after each episode drops, I tweet the questions out as polls, where you can have your say. So let's look at the questions from episode 70 with Bonnie Gordon and see how it went. Pick your favorite of these uniforms: Discovery Medical Whites, TOS Movie Era Engineering Rad Suit, or Voyager Cadet Grays as seen in Endgame. Bonnie picked the Medical Whites, and so did the Twitter people by 44%. The Grays got 31, and the Rad Suit only got 25. That's a pity. Peter Preston makes a sad face. Who should we have seen more of? Mr. Leslie from TOS, Lieutenant J from TNG, or Impella the Dabo Girl from Deep Space Nine? My guest selected Impella, which was the correct answer, people, but in the Twitter poll, it was Mr. Leslie by 52%, Impella got 26%, and Lieutenant J only 22%. Favorite phaser beam color? Red, blue, orange, or green? Both Bonnie and the Bird app boosted for blue, and it got a 47% in the poll. 47. With red and orange tied for 20, and green, the least favorite, at 13. Pick a ship to take a trip: the Vulcan Shuttle from TMP, the SS Zosa from Deep Space Nine, or the Callisto from TNG. My guest picked the Vulcan Shuttle, and the poll respondents did too, at a 50% response rate. The Zosa got 39, and the Callisto only got 11. Most classic line from the 1701D computer: warp core ejection systems offline, program complete, enter when ready, or insert name of character is not on board the Enterprise. Bonnie and the people agreed that the third choice, the character is not on board the Enterprise, was the right answer, and it got 50% in the poll, with program complete getting 33 and warp core ejectors at 17%. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. All right, I got one little caution for you today, and that's when we start the recording, you might hear that my voice is a little bit off, and that's just because the night before the recording, I happened to be at a hockey game and I was screaming my head off, so my voice was on auxiliary power only during the interview, but wasn't all that bad. Anyway, that's it for announcements. Let's get to it. M5, run the show.
Activating show transmission.
His favorite character is that grumbly Chief O'Brien. He loves the Excelsior the best, and he's partial to those logically minded aliens, the Vulcans. He's from Los Angeles, California, North America, Earth, and Sector 001. It's Rob Hedrick. Welcome, Rob, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Rob, are you a Star Trek fan?
I think I have to say yes.
You think you have to say yes? Are you feeling pressure? Are you feeling conflicted?
The further I get into my life, the less conflicted I am about being a Star Trek fan. The show's gotten really cool. The show's been really cool. And the show was really a comfort to me in the pandemic. So yeah, I am a Star Trek fan.
What was the cause of the hesitancy earlier on in your life?
Initially, when I found the show, was probably, I was trying to think yesterday, early 90s probably is when I first found the show. And I found it in the original series airing late at night when I was up too late for being a kid. I found I really liked the technology in it. I'd always been a kid that took stuff apart as a kid. So I really flocked to the idea of like this neat technology that was flying around in space. The hesitancy, though, comes from when I started telling friends that I like Star Trek, it kind of got a stigmatism attached to it. So the nerd kid, you get ostracized for being a nerd. Now being a nerd's the cool thing, but growing up it wasn't. So when you found the people that did like Star Trek, it was really cool to be like, hey, let's go over here and talk about Star Trek. Or, hey, I just got Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise. Let's go check this out. And then like being able to look at blueprints and stuff. So it was cool when you found the people that liked it, and it became kind of the secret club that you could talk with people that liked it about.
I loved Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise. I devoured that thing.
Oh yeah, it was awesome. And then when I found the Haynes manual for the Enterprise, I was like, this is so cool. I'd never been like a car guy or anything, but the idea of like, let me take the Star Trek ship apart and look at it piece by piece was so cool as a kid.
One of the things that I wish I'd still had, that I think when I was a kid, I probably had bought this poster like 5 different times, but I don't have it anymore. And I wish I'd kept one of them, was in the TMP era, they had this giant cutaway poster of the TMP refit. And I had that thing hanging in my room as a kid for years. And I don't remember whatever happened to it. And I'm sure I could get one on eBay at some preposterous price. But,
right.
I still regret getting rid of that thing. I don't know where it went.
Yeah, think of all the stuff like as kids we're like, oh my gosh, that's $15. And now it's like $200 on eBay.
Yeah, exactly. And I certainly wouldn't be hanging that poster up today unless it was like mounted in a frame on acid-free mats.
Right.
So do you still have your Haynes guide?
I do. I actually do still have it. And I have the Sternbach Next Gen manual. I actually have 2 or 3 copies of it because friends of mine will be moving or something. They'll be like, hey, I found this Star Trek manual. Do you want it? And I'll be like, yes, I already have 2 copies of it. But yes, I'll take as many copies as you're willing to give me.
Send me a couple photos of that.
Okay, absolutely.
And I'll be happy to put that up. I mean, people know what it looks like, but it's another thing to see the actual ones that you have, especially that Haynes guide, because I think that's not as popular. So I think people would love getting a photo of that.
I think that's one of the things too, that's cool about the Trekdom is there's really few people that something like that would appeal to. But the idea of, hey, let's do a Star Trek manual about this ship that's really, this big, but that really exists in our minds. And then let's do it like a car manual that everybody's familiar with. I think that's just a really cool thing about the Trekdom that you don't see in other, like there's not a Haynes manual for the TARDIS, although we should do that.
All right. I think if you're going to try to reconcile all the lore in the Whovian fandom and in the show about how the TARDIS actually works, good luck to you.
Right.
Which, by the way, I will say, I think is part of the danger, I think, or the built-in caution, I think, about some of these technical manuals and things, is that fans love this stuff and eat it up. But man, the writers are never beholden to that stuff. And if they decide that they need the ship to do X, Y, or Z, even though that's not possible based on what's in the technical manual, it's going to do the thing.
Right. And they can write around it and say, oh, we changed that at Starbase last week, so it's different than what's in the manual you have.
Yeah. We had a sensor upgrade.
Exactly.
You said you were a kid when you first started watching TOS. About how old were you?
Probably would have been 12, 13.
Okay. And these were obviously not the remasters that we have now. These were the original OG effects and all of that. Yeah?
Oh, yeah. It was crude to say the least. And it's strange now, it's funny you mentioned that because I was rewatching some shows last night and it's so hard to see the new remastered effects and forget how bad the effects were, but they blew your mind because they were still within the story and helped tell the story. But, the Enterprise would be on a travel mat and it would be shaking. Mm-hmm. And now we see that Enterprise completely rendered and phasers bouncing off the ship. And now we see like shield interaction and stuff. And it's like, that wasn't there when we first watched that show. And it doesn't change the story, but I think there's something to the crudeness of the show that made them have to focus completely on story.
Right, because they didn't have anything else to carry it. I mean, they didn't have the effects. A lot of it was just on the actor's performance and them really selling it, right? Which I think was one of the things that was endearing. I would say one of the critiques I think I have of a lot of modern pop culture, sci-fi, and sort of all that stuff is like literally the effects are a crutch. And
absolutely,
if there's not an explosion happening every 1.2 milliseconds, like, it drags, and they don't have to sell anything, right? It's all just, whiz-bang effect stuff. And I'm being a little bit reductionist, and I apologize for that, but it is something I feel. I don't know. But one of the things I do really appreciate that Star Trek did is when they made those TOS remaster Blu-rays, you can actually swap back and forth between the original and the remaster. And I think that was a really good decision because, I sometimes just want to watch the original episode. And for historical purposes, those original episodes are what made Star Trek what it is, not the
Absolutely.
remasters, right? So that's also one of the reasons I'm always down on George Lucas and his revisionism of the original Star Wars, right? It's a piece of film history, but it's not viewable anywhere. You can't.
Right.
See
you
it.
Can't because he's re-edited it so many times.
Yeah, the original one's not available. So, okay. So TNG comes out in the mid 80s. Did you start watching it when it came on or were you hesitant?
I think that I came into Trek a little differently maybe than other people, but again, that's how fandom works. I was always fascinated as a kid by production. So like how films are made, how TV shows are made. My parents got a brand new RCA console TV and left for the weekend and I took it apart. And my mom came back before my dad did. And being the supportive mom that she was, she said, if you can get it back together and it works, I'm not going to tell your father. So I've always been fascinated by how stuff works. So it got to the point that I was even shooting things in Super 8 in my garage and building the kit models of the Enterprise and trying to shoot it and figure out the effects. So I was really interested when Next Generation came out to see like how much are the special effects going to evolve? How much are things going to change? What's the ship going to look like? How do they do the ship? And there was a show that came on called Movie Magic, and they had an episode where Rob Legato walked through all the special effects and how they did them. And then there was even an episode of Reading Rainbow where LeVar Burton took everyone through the ship, took people through Image G, which is a post-production facility here in Los Angeles. And it was not until I became aware of how television works now, like I say now, 25 years ago, how revolutionary what the Next Generation did for production. The fact that they were able to shoot all the shows on film, bang them down to tape, and then edit them on tape so they could do all the composites of the special effects and turn a show. I mean, if you look at the notes, and you can find them all on the internet now, the production schedule they held for essentially a 1-hour feature film that was turned within a month is insane to think about in the early 80s. So I was just blown away by how cool the show was. And yeah, the first season and a half was a little rough, but hey, Star Trek was on TV again and it was new stuff.
I think we should just mention that for those who are listening, that you are in fact a TV producer.
I am. My primary role is a tech manager. So I am in charge of moving a TV production facility that comes in 5 TV trucks to a different city every weekend and putting a TV show on a network from a different location every weekend for 22 weekends a year.
So you are very familiar with how the sauce is made and all the stuff behind the scenes. So when you have an opinion on this stuff, it's an opinion that actually has some experience behind it.
Yeah, and it's weird, the lines I draw in my head of the stuff I do today being influenced by the stuff I learned from Star Trek, just the way that the problem solving. And that's why, Chief O'Brien always appealed to me, was because he was that guy that was just like, hey, the transporter's broken. I'm going to go figure out what's wrong. And then you come back 2 scenes later and he's like, oh, yeah, we had to change out the thing with the stuff because the over thing was broken. And I rewrote some software and did this. And it's just like he had it handled. And he had the problem solving skills. And that was really cool.
Can you give me an example about how you feel that watching Star Trek has influenced your current work?
Everything's solvable. If there's a problem that happens, you can figure it out by thinking about it. It's really funny because there's a guy I hired in DC named Brad, and
hi, Brad.
He was a huge Star Trek fan as well, and so we instantly bonded over that. And he said one day, like when he turned in his 2 weeks notice, I was upset because I was losing my buddy Brad. But he said to me, he looked at me, he said, you manage a lot like Captain Picard does. And I was like, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. And I just said, I manage the way I want to be managed. And a lot of that was influenced by the way Picard always had that idea of, let me hear everyone's opinion, and then I'll use my judgment or my own opinion or my own idea, but I'll open it up to suggestions. I mean, how many times have we heard him say, like in the middle of a crisis, I'm open to suggestions after he tries what he thinks is the right answer?
Yeah, how many Star Trek briefing room scenes did we have in TNG, right? That it's basically the same script, like with the different problem of the week, right? Here's the problem. What should we do, everyone?
Right. And then they go in and have their group discussion, and he goes around the table, and it's so interesting to see, like, everyone has their perspective of how to attack the problem. And then he says, we're going to do this. And then everybody goes, okay, that's what the captain said. Let's go do it.
And then you're producing your show, right? Getting it done.
Exactly.
TNG comes out, you start watching TNG, and then of course we had Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. Were you staying current with all of that?
So I have to say, and this kind of, I know this gets me a demerit.
No, there's no demerits here.
I did not watch Deep Space Nine when it aired. I was like, this can't be any good. It's on a space station. There's no ship. They're not flying around. There's no way this is going to be good. So I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it until we were all locked in our houses in 2020. And I said, now's the time to watch Deep Space Nine. I've never seen it. I need some new Star Trek to comfort me. This is new to me. I got 20 minutes into the first season, the first episode, and I texted Brad and I said, I can't believe what an idiot I was to not have watched this. I mean, that scene, there's a meme that goes around the internet that it's like, I think it may have just come out, but the meme where it said, it was Picard and Cisco talking in the conference room on the ship. And he said, so you just punched Q in the face and he left? It's like Cisco was such an incredible force of nature in 10 minutes in that show.
Yeah.
And it was a completely different management style than Picard, but it was awesome. And I was hooked. I think I got all the way to season seven. Yeah. I think I got all the way through in like a month and a half, 2 months. I mean, it was back to back to back to back. I just couldn't get enough of it. And then when I got to the end, I said, I can't believe I didn't watch this when it aired.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you gave Deep Space Nine a pass, but did you watch Voyager and Enterprise as they came out as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in fact, as we're recording this is the 28th year anniversary of when Voyager first aired. And I remember figuring out like, okay, there's this new UPN network. How am I going to watch this? And I sat down and had appointment viewing to sit there in my room and watch Voyager as it aired on the new UPN network.
Nice. And then then we had a little interregnum there after Enterprise, and then we had the Kelvin films. Did you watch those?
I did. In fact, I know that it has a mixed reaction in the fandom, but I have to say it was so exciting to see a new Trek film on the big screen. I think I went to the first JJ film like 13 times to see it. And it was awesome with the sound experience, being in a theater with other people that like Star Trek. It was just awesome to see Trek back on the big screen again.
Yeah, I went to the 2009 film in a uniform.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's peak nerd for me right there. And so then we entered the streaming era. So did you keep up with all the shows as they came out?
I did. I actually, again, it was the whole, any Trek is good Trek. New Trek is good Trek. I enjoyed watching Star Trek. I liked the storytelling method of the new Star Trek. It felt very different from what I had felt Trek was. Again, I'm very much a story first person. So I enjoyed hearing the way they told the story of especially like Discovery, the way it came out. And again, the amount of special effects they were dropping, the production values. There's no one that can argue it was the highest level of production values we'd seen in Star Trek since the inception.
And so what series would you say is your favorite right now?
That's a hard question.
That it could change tomorrow, but right now
it does. I think that I have to say for storytelling mechanism, Strange New Worlds. I think that it's really amazing to see Anson Mount as Captain Pike quickly became one of my favorite captains. Mm-hmm. I think that the way he embodies what Starfleet's always been is really amazing. And again, the special effects and to see what they've done with the Enterprise is just insanely cool.
The ship revisionism doesn't bother you? I know some people get hung up on that.
It does a little bit, but there's people that always say, oh, it's not canon. And it's like, yeah, but the fans don't get to decide that. The people who pay to have it made get to decide that. And I know that's going to get me a lot of people mad at me, but I think that Coca-Cola decides Coca-Cola's formula because they're Coca-Cola. I may not like it and may not drink it, and I'll switch to Pepsi, but it's still the Coca-Cola.
So we've had this discussion on Trek Profiles many times, and so I will just say this and just leave it here, which is that there's no such thing as Star Trek canon. It doesn't exist. And Star Trek has never been a show that promised consistent world building, and if you're expecting that, you are trying to cash a check that was never written to you. So that's my opinion on that.
That's like we said in the pre-interview, like, you could have all the manuals in the world and I could have the show Bible and everything in the world. All it takes is a writer saying, hey, I need the ship to do this. Oh, it went into Starbase 2 months ago and got that addition to it. So now the transporter can send 90,000 miles or whatever it is. That's all it takes to change the canon.
Not only that, but, speaking of show Bibles, if you dive into any of those show Bibles, try to find the one paragraph, because every show Bible has one, that says, we will never do stories about X, Y, or Z. Yeah. If that show's been on the air for more than a season, there's an episode about X, Y, and Z. Guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in the Next Gen Bible, there's so many things that it's like, we will never do a story about this. It's like,
you can't go past warp
episodes. 10. There's 5 episodes
about that. It's not possible to go
that.
past warp 10. We've had episodes about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Every episode will be about our characters first and foremost. Well, there's the episode First Contact, which is really about the alien planet, and then our characters are kind of in a supporting role, right? I mean, there's so many episodes that violate the things, Gene Roddenberry's vision is violated in the show.
But I'd argue and say again, that's what art is. Art is, we set up a set of rules, we have a construct, and then we break those rules. Because once we know how the rules play and we know how to paint, we paint differently, and now we've set up new rules. That's what I think the beauty of art is.
Hear, hear. It looks like you're current on everything and you've seen it all as we record this.
Yeah, I've watched everything.
Animated series?
I've watched it through once.
Once counts?
It is the original animated series is rough. It is the one series that it was really hard to push through.
Right on, right on. So one question I ask, and it's okay if you don't have an answer, but do you remember the first episode of Star Trek that you saw?
I think the one I can remember the furthest back, I think it was Amok Time, because I remember the music. I remember that music, and every time I hear that cue, and anytime it's played, Family Guy makes fun of it with that. Every time I hear that music, I remember that. So I think that's the earliest episode I can remember.
It's iconic for sure, right? That's like one thing. You could be in a Star Trek convention or a room full of Star Trek people. You play that, and everyone immediately knows.
Everybody knows it's time to get the American Gladiator giant Q-tips out.
That's right. That's right. It's time for the unwound.
Yes.
So you've mentioned that you have some technical manuals. What else is in your Star Trek collection, Rob?
I know you're not recording the video we're doing to do this recording, but I've got the most recent edition was the Hallmark Tree Topper with the original series Enterprise on it, which is, if anybody doesn't have that, go get it tomorrow. It's awesome. It's cool to set on a shelf, just as cool as it is to put on top of your tree. There's a couple of micro models that I've really become obsessed with lately. I think the design of the ships has always fascinated me. So that's kind of like, that's what I always look for to add to my collection. And any props, I'm not really as concerned about screen used props as just the props as the idea. So I've got 1 or 2 tricorders and a few communicators.
My listeners, you can always know that any photos that your guest sends me, I will put up on my show notes page up at trekprofiles.com. So go check that out if you want to see some of the stuff that Rob is talking about. Rob, have you ever worn a cosplay?
I had never worn or owned a uniform until the pandemic, and the company I worked for, we started doing bi-weekly Zooms, and one of the Zooms was going to fall on Halloween, and we all agreed that we were going to dress up. So I bought a 2009 uniform shirt and wore it on the Zoom, bought a comm badge and everything, period comm badge. And it was great too, because most of the people on the Zoom didn't know what it was, and I had to explain it. And they were like, "What is that yellow shirt you're wearing?" And I said,
good.
Well,
I was going to ask, because that's very important. We need to know what color you
absolutely had to do yellow. It was a tough choice between yellow and red, because, Scotty's always top of the list too. So I bought that. I've never been to a convention.
Oh my. I would encourage you to come to a convention, Rob. I think you'd really love it. Every now and then I see some fans posting online things like, "Oh, I'm really nervous about going to the Star Trek convention. What's it going to be like?" And I always tell them, "This is your tribe. These are your people. No one comes down here because they're going to hate on Star Trek."
Right. It's almost like, I don't know what the opposite of anxiety would be. Excitement, maybe. Like, it's almost like I'm worried that I'm going to like it too much and want to be like, "Okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? When do we get to do this again? When do we get to go again?"
Yeah, well, that's what happened with me with the Star Trek cruise. I went last year for the first time, and I thought, well, I'll just do this once, and I'm like, I have to go back. Are you rewatching any Star Trek as of right now?
I always say, like, I'm in Star Trek, so I'll be in the middle of certain episodes, and we all have the same, you're in a mood and you're like, "Oh, I really need to watch a Voyager. Oh, I really need to watch a Next Gen," or, "Oh, I really need to watch an original series." So I always have them like somewhere in the middle of a watch. So like right now I'm season 1 of TOS. I'm just kind of like hopping around, and I just kind of go through, hop to favorite episodes, and then I'll get some weird inkling and just say, "Okay, I'm going to start at the beginning of Next Generation," or "I'm going to start at the beginning of Enterprise. I'm going to start at the beginning of DS9," and just go through it.
So you're a disciplined rewatcher then?
Sometimes. I mean, I try to go episode to episode, but then there's moments where it's just like, I really want to watch Best of Both Worlds. I really want to watch All Good Things. Oh, I really want to watch Encounter at Farpoint. So you find like certain episodes that you're really just like rewatching over and over again. It's funny, this person I was dating a few years ago, she was like, "How can you watch the same episode over and over again?" I was like, "How can you listen to the same Taylor Swift song over and over again?"
No.
And she was like, "Okay, fair point." I said, "Star Trek's my music. I like the same song over and over again."
Okay, Rob, so you're a TV professional. So when you choose to watch Star Trek, how do you choose to consume it? I mean, are you watching it on a small device, on a big screen TV? Are you streaming it, watching discs? What are you doing?
Yes.
You're going to have to say more about that, my man.
It depends. I travel a lot for work, so sometimes I'm hindered by where I am at the time. I travel an Apple TV with me in my suitcase so that I can watch whatever I want to watch wherever I am. I have a fully Dolby Atmos home theater at home and a 80-inch television. And depending on what experience I'm going for, it's either off of a Blu-ray disc or just on the Paramount Plus app. I have a bunch of episodes I bought before Paramount Plus on iTunes, so I'll watch through that. It's just kind of depending on, is it I want to sit down and watch with a purpose, or I'm just trying to put something on to be entertained. But yeah, it's between, I watch it on the phone, I watch it on a hotel TV, I'll watch it on my big screen TV. I have a TV in my office that I'll just put it up on while I'm working and have it up, depending on the time and place.
So as a TV professional, I think you're especially qualified to answer this question. The quality of the episodes aside, what gives you the best experience in watching Star Trek right now? Like you say, I want the most immersive, best looking, most highest quality Star Trek. streaming, disc, what version, what show, what's the best looking Star Trek, right? Quality of the episodes aside, quality of the, all that stuff aside. I'm just saying, as far as like a theatrical experience with the quality of what you're getting on the final screen, what looks really good to you?
You got to go with the disc. You got to go with the Blu-ray to get the highest quality, just because the data rate's high enough. The streaming's pretty good. It's pretty solid, but if you get right up on it, you can look and see, you're still going to see some codec fragments in there just because the nature of how streaming happens. But yeah, the disc's probably the best experience.
So are you the kind of guy that goes out and actually buys the discs for things that have already been on the streaming network?
Yeah.
And are you watching them? Is that what you choose to do?
Yeah,
when you have them
I usually, if I want to really like go push through some episodes, like I pulled out the TNG discs the other night, and I watch it all the time on the app, but you forget until you put a disc in and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like pristine off the disc. Like CBS Digital did such a good job rescanning the Next Generation frame by frame. I actually went to their facility for another project, and I walked in the door and realized like, oh, wait a minute. This is where I was like, you guys are the guys that did TNG. And he goes, oh yeah, we're the smoke artists and everything that rescanned it. And I was like, is the scanner here? And because I actually, in my current job, I have a bunch of film that needs to be rescanned. So I actually talked to them about possibly using their same gear to rescan some film for a project I was working on. And so I spent 2.5, 3 hours chatting with them about what they had done for the Next Gen. And it was really cool to hear like the behind the scenes tech of what they put together. And I mean, the scanner they used is probably about one of the best in the world right now. Well, that was, I talked to them 5 years ago, but the fact that they were able to go back in and rebuild it, and they did a good job, like adhering to the original director's vision and not recomping anything. They did a really nice job, and it looks phenomenal.
Man, I'd be like, can I get a selfie with the scanner?
It's funny. So that tour was also, I got to go, one of the unit production managers at Television City, which is in Beverly Hills. It's where they shoot The Price is Right and all the soap operas and everything. He took me down to the film archive, and he handed me this big can, and it was this giant reel of 35 millimeter film. And I was like, what's this? He goes, that's episode 1 of I Love Lucy.
Oh,
and I was like, okay. I was like, can I take a picture with this? He goes, I've worked here 50 years and I can't take a picture with this. I was like, fair enough.
What, with a can?
He did no pictures inside the facility.
Oh, okay. I gotcha.
None.
Okay.
Like he said, you're not allowed. They will take your phone and kick you out of the building.
Wow. Okay.
They don't want any proprietary secrets out.
I think it's time, Rob, to talk about some episodes. Are you game?
Let's do it.
All right, then I think we're going to jump around a little bit. Let's start with a classic. And I'm just going to say that a lot of people bring this episode up on the show, so I'm going to be looking forward to hearing your particular take on it. And that's the Best of Both Worlds two-parter, although as longtime listeners will note, I always say it's really a three-parter because Family is Best of Both Worlds Part 3. It's one contiguous thing, and naming it something else was a mistake, in my opinion. So TNG Season 3, Episode 26, Season 4, Episode 1, and of course I always include Episode 2, Best of Both Worlds. So tell me what's going on with this particular episode, Rob. Why does it personally connect with you?
It's a really weird connection I have to it. Aside from everything that everybody says about the episode, it being awesome and, it was cool to see like Riker in command, everything. It's the first time I remember as a kid being pissed at television. Because I remember when you get the big swell of the music and he says, Mr. Worf, fire. And then it goes, to be continued. And I was like, crap. We don't get to see what happens and we have to live with this all summer. What are you doing to me? So I remember all summer re-watching every VHS tape I had to be like, what are they going to do? What's going to happen? And so the love of that episode is really the first time I remember as a kid being obsessed with story and trying to like get into the minds of the writers, the minds of the like characters. What's going to happen when we come back in the fall and see what happens next? And then of course it's all that everything says about that episode. It was so cool to see, like, they reshot so much stuff for that episode of the Enterprise. We got to see the Enterprise do things we'd never seen it do before. And it was really all of the characters that we'd fallen in love with for the previous seasons were put in a place they'd never been in before. And we were seeing Riker in a role that we'd never seen him in before. He was having to deal with someone that was questioning him in a way he's never been questioned before. It was a really cool thought experiment in changing our comfort with Trek that we had thought we knew up until that point.
What was your opinion of the Shelby character?
I think that it was a really interesting idea of, it was really Riker from season 1. It was the Riker that we met at Farpoint, and we were seeing the growth in Riker reflected back on himself, and he had to deal with who he had become, not realizing he had been that brass, snot-nosed person when he came on the ship.
Yeah, I loved the Shelby character, and in sort of my head, not that I want to rewrite the show or anything, but I always wonder, like, I would have loved to have seen, like, the Shelby and Riker show, like them off on some ship, doing their own, thing, with him commanding, and, him on the Titan, I guess, or, her as the XO, and them just sort of, having like fisticuffs over what
Absolutely.
to be done. Because I really liked her. She was a firecracker. And
I think that she brought a lot to the table in her knowledge of the Borg and knowledge of, hey, we got to go do this because our windows are closing. We got to make sure things happen now. It's a really interesting dynamic we'd never seen Riker challenged in a way before.
Okay, perfect. Let's talk about TNG Season 4, Episode 19, The Nth Degree. Now, I particularly love this episode because it brings us Dwight Schultz again as Barclay, but not doing the shy, sort of timid, sort of holodeck Barclay, but really just a very different sort of Flowers for Algernon take on Barclay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me, what about this particular episode interests you?
I think that, again, we spoke earlier about the shy nerd telling people he liked Star Trek. And I think that we all in the nerd zeitgeist have these visions of grandeur. So I think that this episode really said, Barclay always knew he was this guy. Barclay knows that he's smart. Barclay knows that he knows how to do all the stuff everybody else on the ship does. He's just timid because he has no self-confidence. Well, now he has the self-confidence, and now he's like arguing grand unification theories with Albert Einstein. He's sitting there and reinforcing the shields by 200% when they need to fire a torpedo. And it's cool to see his growth. And again, it says something too about the actor, the fact that he's able to do that switch from the shy, timid Barclay to the, hey guys, I got this. I'm going to take care of this and I'm going to make it happen. And I know more than all of you combined. Oh, and by the way, now I'm going to be the ship's computer because I'm better at that too. So I think it was cool to see like his growth as a character. And I think as a kid, when I saw that episode, I liked the idea of that kind of was always in him. He just needed this probe to be able to reprogram him to let it all come out. And then I have this is a bizarre twist on this. My dad passed away at the start of the pandemic, but 2 Thanksgivings before that, I was sitting watching Star Trek at my parents' house because that's all there is to do at my house. And the scene when Barclay's arguing grand unification theories comes on and they show the chalkboard. And my dad taught advanced mathematics for 40 years at a university.
Oh, goodness.
And so he walks in and that's on the chalkboard and he goes, that formula's not right. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so I paused it and he goes, oh, well, they curved the semi-sets into the subatomic there. They really need to have this set over there. And then they need to put this set over there. And then this needs to curve down here. Like he fixed the math problem on the chalkboard.
That's glorious.
So every time I watch that episode now, that's what pops in my head is my dad fixing the math problem. And I'm sure that they, knowing Star Trek, had people come in and do the math properly. It's just that my dad knew the math wasn't exactly right.
Oh my, yeah, they do have some science advisors on the show. In fact, I've had Dr. Erin McDonald, who's current a science advisor for Star Trek. She was actually a previous guest on Trek Profiles.
Nice.
I'll put a link up to that in the show notes for the episode. One of the things that I noticed in my rewatch of the episode in preparation for this was they mentioned the Argus array, and I just out of the blue I decided to look that up on Memory Alpha. If you're familiar with Memory Alpha. And I realized exactly how many times the Argus array gets mentioned and reused in Star Trek. It's so many times. And this, I think, was the first mention of it. But it just keeps getting mentioned again and again and showing up on maps and in other places and all of that. So that was kind of a cool little thing I noticed. And another thing was I just want to give a little shout out to Gates because as Dr. Crusher, she did some great just silent acting in the whole scene where Troy is talking about getting a pass, getting from Barclay, and just Gates is just like totally hamming it up, with her facial expressions in the background, and I just got such a thrill out of that. It was so funny. I got a crack out of it.
So the other thing that I really loved about that episode was it's number 2 for Rob Legato, Mr. Avatar himself, special effects guy, and there's some. I know this is kind of silly, but if you go to 2732 on your playhead in the episode, there is this shot where a camera comes trucking across the front of the bridge. We start on the con position. We rack focus back to Picard. We rack focus back to the con. And then it rack focuses back to the ops position. And I think I had that backwards. But either way, the shot is incredibly well composed. There's movement in and out of the shot. It is an awesome composition. And that Rob Legato, as director, said, let's do this. And then he reversed the whole shot at 2813. And we get this great shot of Picard standing up. We rack back to Riker, and then we rack back to the con. It is an awesome composition of shot.
All right. Well, that's the kind of homework that we're going to leave for the viewers to bring that episode up, hopefully on disc if you have it, streaming if you don't, and go check that out. And that's the kind of stuff I appreciate from having people like yourself on who know about how the sausage is made. You can point these things out to us. In fact,
one more research thing that I did on the show because I didn't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
The scene when Barclay's sitting there with the lasers.
Yeah. Real lasers.
There was a show note that said they shot it at 6 to 8 frames per second so that the lasers would show up the way they did. And they said they had to shoot the film slowly, and it only would have been able to be done that way if Rob Legato, visual effects genius that he is, did it that way. So I don't know if that's why they had to do Barclay in voiceover, but the slower frames is what let the lasers show up the way they did. And he said that they actually used real lasers so they didn't have to do it in post, and so they could move the camera around while they were doing it.
One thing that did take me out of the episode, and I will admit this is only because of my own personal background, is they use this phrase that is consistently misused across all genres and in almost every area where they talk about something like this. And it's, the reactor is critical. Oh no, that does not mean what people think it means.
Right.
When I was in the Navy, I worked in a nuclear reactor plant on a submarine. And this is actually something that is not a big deal. So for those who are interested, all it means is this. The reactor is critical means that the reactor is now at a self-sustaining power level, and power is neither increasing nor decreasing. So to give
because critical in a nuclear reaction means it's doing its thing, right?
It's self-sustaining at a constant power level. So to give you an example from like an automotive example, if you're cruising down a country lane at 45 miles an hour, the engine is critical. That is what that means. It is at constant power. You are not increasing nor decreasing. It is just constant, right? Anytime power is increasing, that's supercritical, even if it's normal. So when you're starting the reactor, right, and you're starting the reactor up, it goes supercritical every time because you're going from zero power. If your car is going from 0 miles an hour to 1 mile an hour, 1 mile an hour to 2 miles an hour, you're supercritical because you have to. It just means reactor power is increasing. That's all it means.
Oh, that's interesting.
Means power is decreasing. So the reactor is always critical. Well, not always, but
because it's reacting.
A constant power level is critical.
I like that.
Not bad.
That's good.
It's not bad. The reactor, it should be critical.
That's great.
So they misuse this in all episodes of everything, and it's just something that always irks me. And it's just because I happen to know that because that's something that I did in my past.
That's a really good trope. That's a great little bit of knowledge.
Yeah, so you can now correct that, Rob. If any part of the properties that you're working on, they're ever using this, you can correct them and say that that's not exactly correct.
That's pretty great.
Absolutely. It's just one thing I just want to point out. Okay, so let's talk about the companion Barkley episode. Let's talk about TNG Season 3, Episode 21, Hollow Pursuits. This is, of course, the one where we have Minnie Riker and Barkley in the holodeck. I wanted to talk about the Nth Degree first, and then come back to Hollow Pursuits, because I thought it might be interesting to compare and contrast them in this way. So tell me what's going on with this particular episode and why it's of interest to you. What about it touches you?
I think it's the same thing as the Nth Degree. It's kind of starts off as kind of a telenovela. We're kind of like, we don't know exactly what's going on. We're thrown into this story and we're seeing super self-confident Barkley, and then we realize he's on the holodeck. But through the episode, we see kind of the feeling that all of us have had of being the person has to prove themselves, knowing who we are as a person, but not being able to interact with others the way that everybody else does, and then finding a normality that lets us exist with this great experience of being on this starship. But in the end, when they're sitting there figuring out what's going on, like, we know there's a connection, but what's the connection? And Barkley's the one that decides, oh, wait a minute, every one of you is in charge of these subsystems, and every one of you touched it. You're the connection. And I think that like, I call it a monkey touch the light bulb moment. The monkey touch the light bulb moment of him realizing that they're the connection is just awesome. Like, the fact that he solves it and realizes they're the ones spreading the Invidium around and have to fix it. That's so cool to me. And I remember as a kid watching that being like, see, the nerdy guy can solve it. The nerdy guy can figure it out.
I almost feel like they should have entitled this episode The Imposter Syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So for listeners, Rob and I had discussed previously, but that you will not have heard this if I choose to put it in the bonus material. I was talking about a work experience that I had when I was working for the cable company, and I was in a work situation that I was totally unprepared for, and I was like, how did I get here? And it really was a Barkley moment for me. I felt like someone was going to walk in the room and be like, what are you doing in here? Get out. So I think we all experience that. And I think it's something that a lot of Star Trek fans find in this particular episode and really connect with. And so I think Barkley is a character that, while he's not been in all that much Star Trek, I mean, only a handful of episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6, something like that. I might not have that number exactly right, so no emails, please. But I feel like he's just a character that has had outsized impact due to the way that he's played and the material that they gave him. I think he really made a lasting legacy on the show, and I'm very appreciative of that.
It's interesting too, if you look at I think it was in Memory Alpha, the show notes after this episode, they all the producers were very excited about what do we do to get Barkley back on the show? Like, how do we write him back into another episode? And that's how they came up with Nth Degree.
All right, so let's talk about something a little bit different. Let's talk about TNG Season 6, Episode 18, Die Hard in Space. Ooh, excuse me.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Starship Mine. So, and I think that the writers of the show would reject the notion that it's Die Hard in Space. In fact, I think there's some stuff in Memory Alpha about this where they talk about, well, this kind of story has been done lots before, and it's not really from Die Hard, but it's Die Hard in Space. So we have, unfortunately, I think one of the most underappreciated characters. People love to hate on Commander Hutch, and I always feel really bad for him because he just wants to talk to people and ends up dead. So yeah. I always have a little sad spot for him, but I'm curious for you, Rob. Tell me what's going on with Starship Mine. Why is this episode one that made the list?
I know they say a lot of the show notes say Starship Mine's not Die Hard in Space, but they booked director Cliff Bole, who did MacGyver and Mission Impossible. So I think that there was kind of a pre-understanding that they knew who they needed to direct this episode. And I think that we had a really fun episode of John Captain Picard, going through the ship, protecting the ship, and being the only one in the ship that knew what was going on outside of the B story down on the planet, trying to figure out, what are these people doing on my ship? What are they trying to accomplish here? And ultimately figuring out that they're trying to get the trilithium out of the engine core to be able to sell it to whoever needs it. They don't even care who they're selling it to. They just know that they're going to make money off of it. And then the rest of the command team on the planet figuring out, okay, something's going on here. We don't know what it is, and not having any idea that Captain Picard's up defending the ship by himself.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Rob, because one of the things I liked about this list is that we've got a couple of episodes, such as the Barclay episodes, which are really more, I think, thoughtful and intellectual, sort of traditional Star Trek stories in a way. And then you have an episode like Starship Mine, which is really rip-roaring action adventure in a lot of ways, right? And when you tune into Star Trek, and this could be TOS or TNG, I think Deep Space Nine was like this, Voyager kind of, although they kind of had a little bit different thing going on there, but certainly with Enterprise, you never knew each week what you were going to get.
Yeah.
And I don't mean in terms of quality, but are we going to have a mystery? Are we going to have a rip-roaring adventure? Are we going to have sort of a, intellectual, thoughtful sort of story, or, some combination of these things? And so like every episode was kind of its own little package. And it seems like in modern Trek, they've really gotten away from that, right? Everything has to be a sci-fi spectacular, right? There must be an explosion every 5 minutes or something. Now, I'm being a little bit reductionist, and I hope you'll forgive me for that. But I would just want to put that out, and I'm being a little bit intentionally provocative to give you something to respond to. So it's a little bit of wind up and throat clearing, but I'm interested in your point of view on that.
I think you're right. I think that the problem that we have, and this is one of the things that drives me crazy with modern TV, in air quotes, is studios are so focused on appealing to the masses. And even though it's Star Trek and they know that they have the built-in core audience, I think that a lot of the times the studios think that they have to put the Michael Bay, bang him up, blow him up, shoot him up in to appeal to the people that normally wouldn't watch Star Trek. So there's not as much of the think experiments that we get with TNG. And I think that TNG really kind of solidified the formula and then improved upon the TOS idea of, again, hey, let's have a bottle episode where it's two people in a room talking out a problem. Let's have an episode that is about a Measure of a Man. Let's think of the idea of people's rights, human rights, inalienable human rights, the idea of what exactly makes up an episode can be a centralized single idea. It doesn't have to be, let's go blow up everything in the galaxy. And I think a little bit of that's lost in modern television because you have things like NCIS that's been on the air for 65 years and it's the same thing, different story. I think that a little bit of that gets spilled over into any kind of television that's made nowadays because they think they have to appeal to everyone. And we lose a little bit of that, but that's one of the things I really think comes back in Trek is you're still able to weave that think experiment into an episode.
The reason that I asked the question that way is because I thought it was a good wind up to bring us into another episode that's on the list, which is Strange New Worlds, season 1, episode 1. And I'm just going to put it out there that I think one of the reasons that the reaction has been so positive to Strange New Worlds is I feel like they've somehow melded the two, pardon the pun, and really managed to have sort of that sci-fi spectacular sort of look with the new special effects and really, using a lot of the new technology really well to bring something that just looks amazing. At the same time, telling sort of these very intellectual stories that have sort of a moral quandary at the center that you can really think about and chew upon 3 hours after you've watched it and even 3 days and 3 months after you've watched it. So I'll just put that out there as an assertion to let you respond to.
I think if we're 5 years down the road and I have an artificial intelligence system that says, make an episode of Star Trek in the style of the original series, and I put the episode Strange New Worlds Season 1, Episode 1 script into that AI machine, and it made Captain Kirk, Spock, and Bones do that episode, you would assume it was an original series episode. I think it's that strong of a script. It's told in that storytelling style, and it's just done with modern effects, modern actors, and modern production values. I think the story is very original series. It's very well told, and I think it's the big think experiment that we all love about Star Trek.
So how did you feel about this whole starting the whole series with the idea that Captain Pike is sort of, contemplating his way out of Starfleet and sort of having a life crisis and starting there as opposed to working our way into it? What did you think about that?
I think that's that's one of I love stories. Christopher Nolan's one of my favorite directors because he'll throw you into a story without giving you the backstory. And I think that coming into it, if you hadn't watched what happened to him in Discovery, you still would understand that he's fighting with something. But having known and knowing from the original series what happens to Captain Pike, and now we kind of got to see the backstory, I think it's an interesting storytelling mechanism to pick up right in the middle of his crisis of conscience. And past that episode, we really see his growth as I think it's Spock in the middle of that, the last act. He says, you only know how to be you, be the captain that you are. And that's kind of that moment where I was like, oh, okay, I like Chris Pike a lot. Captain Pike's my guy now. Like the idea that I can only be what I can be. And that's what leads me to what ultimately ends up not ruining my life, but severely disabling my life. I'm going to go head first into the wall as hard as I can to be the best me I can be. And I think that's everything that Star Trek's supposed to be.
So there was a couple of things that I really noticed in my rewatch going back and looking at the episode very carefully in preparation for this, which is that, and I think that a lot of the newer Trek, and this is not a Strange New Worlds thing, I think a lot of the other shows have done this, even Discovery, which is a prequel, is that they've really gone to change some of the foundational thing, well, not foundational, but things we've always assumed to be true in the Star Trek universe, and I'll just give you a simple example, which is that right at the beginning of the episode, sure looked to me like we were using real eggs to make those omelets, like real eggs from a chicken.
Yeah.
and not sort of the replicated eggs that we would be expecting, especially in TNG where they're like, what? Nobody eats meat anymore. But then we see bunny corn pizzas in Star Trek Picard. We see real eggs here in season 1, episode 1 of Strange New Worlds. We see a wind farm.
Yeah.
You're going to have to explain to me a wind farm, because it seems to me with matter-antimatter reactors, you can have infinite free power.
Well, but maybe now the wind farm's part of the weather modification network.
I mean, it's possible, but it just seems like really, really retro.
For sure.
A lot of ways, and so I think there's a lot of, which I'm not criticizing any of this, by the way. I just think it's an interesting choice, and I think it's something to note as you watch Star Trek, because I've already said here in this episode and in many of the other episodes, Star Trek canon doesn't exist. So I don't get wrapped around the axle about this stuff. But I do note when they change these things. And there are some people who get really, really
absolutely
agitated about that stuff. I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about this kind of stuff when they start playing, making changes in some of these things that we've long assumed to be true?
I think that there's certain things, again, I look at this from the writer's perspective and the producer's perspective. Captain Pike being a cook is really, really part of his character. And we start seeing he's very conscious about the idea of food is a great unification. It's kind of the Anthony Bourdain adage of food brings us all together.
Right.
And I think that's really inherent to his character. And so the idea that maybe he doesn't get those eggs out of the replicator. Maybe he figures out a way to get fresh eggs brought on the ship so he can do that. Maybe he knows hey, I know you can get whatever you want out of the replicator, but I'm going to be the guy that gives you a meal you're not going to forget. And then we're going to bond over it and we're going to talk. So I think that's really inherent to his character. And I think that's a really cool choice that the writers have made with him to see all the bonding. I mean, some of my favorite scenes from season 1 are sitting around his table. I mean, even the scene,
his cooking table. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, and you have that scene when the security officer comes in and she's like, I'm not hungry. I don't want anything. You're going to want to eat this. And she takes a bite and she's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's like, that's what food does to people. Like, food is such a, everyone who walks the planet has to eat. And the more that we like can share in that moment, ideas are formed and shared experiences happen over a table.
A couple of things I really love about the episode, just a couple little observations I just kind of want to go through, which is that as I watched the episode, I was really struck by this one particular scene, and I'm wondering if it is an intentional homage, and I wasn't able to find out. But the scene where Pike is in the shuttlecraft approaching the Enterprise seemed almost shot for shot very evocative of Kirk in the Kelvin films.
Yeah.
In the same bit where he's in the shuttlecraft seeing the Enterprise for the first time. I mean, the way it's shot, the look of the shuttlecraft, the way that and I'm not saying the angles are the same, but it just seemed to me to be the same beats, the same like little sequence, just shot a little differently. And I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought they were both great. But I was just wondering how much of it seemed like if they were being intentional in Strange New Worlds in evoking the 2009 film.
I think it was that. And I think it also goes back to, we have that, remember that 27.5-minute Robert Wise sequence from the motion picture that reveals
6.5 minutes, Rob. It was only 6.5.
Yeah. It just feels like 27.5 minutes. I always joke when people first come to Star Trek and they watch that film, I'm like, I text them an hour after they started. I was like, are you still in the scene where they're showing off the Enterprise? I love it. It's great. But Robert Wise is known for being a long format storyteller, but I loved it. It's just funny. And I think it's hilarious that Lower Decks makes fun of it in an episode too. I think that, yes, it was a tribute to that, but I think that's that's another Star Trek trope is let's make you really see this beautiful ship and this wonderful, like, this is our new home. So I think that you have to do that kind of reveal, and fans expect it because we want to see the ship. That's our favorite main character.
I'm going to make an assertion now, and I'd be curious for any of the listeners here. You can feel free to weigh in and tell me I'm wrong, but I am of an age that I saw motion picture in movie theaters. And I will tell you that at the time, and this is, again, there wasn't internet, and Twitter and all that stuff, but I was talking to other kids my age and, some older fans at the time. I was getting Star Trek fan magazines and stuff like that. And I don't recall anybody who went to TMP in 1979 and 1980 walking out of there saying they spent too long showing us the ship. Not one
absolutely.
person
Yeah.
would have said that. That is a modern critique.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's me having 800 episodes at my disposal of Star Trek, not me walking into a theater not having seen Star Trek in 12 years, was it? Mm-hmm. Between when it aired and that. I think it's wonderful, and it's one of the things I go to all the time to rewatch because I love that sequence. I think the music there, like, can you imagine that without that music track behind it? Like,
no,
it sells every bit of that, and it's awesome. But I still love making fun of it.
I get it. It is fun, but it's also, I think, just an example of filmmaking was a little bit different. I mean,
yeah,
just, totally off the wall and unrelated to this. And maybe I'll put this in the bonus material, but I've recorded a podcast. I was a guest on another sci-fi podcast as we record this, talking about a non-Star Trek thing. And it's the book, not the movies, but the book, Solaris. I don't know if you ever read that or had any experience with it. So anyway, there was a George Clooney movie made of it that only bears a superficial resemblance to the book. I would not recommend it. It doesn't really tell you what the book is like. But there was a Soviet era film that was made in 1972 by a guy named Tarkovsky, who was really, he's regarded as one of the auteurs, right, in cinema in the early 70s. And there's like a 2-minute scene of a guy riding in a car. That's it. I didn't leave anything out. It's 2 minutes of a guy in a car. 2 minutes of a guy riding. What happens? Nothing. What does he say? Nothing. What is he doing? Riding in the car. What's the story? There is no story. It's a guy riding in the car. and that's it. And, this kind of stuff was very common. I know I've talked on Trek Profiles before about this, and I apologize for mentioning it for the 8th time. Like, if you go back and look at some other movies of the period, I'm thinking of, like, The Deer Hunter begins with 6 minutes of Russian folk dancing.
Yeah.
6 minutes, So I'm not trying to excuse anything. I just want to say that it was a different era, and, people kind of had a different mentality about how they edited these things together and what they chose to put in the films.
I think it's interesting if you look at the notes now too, and we didn't know it at the studios weren't as forthcoming about things as they are now. It's really amazing to think that they had 2 teams of special effects people working at the same time to get that film ready, and then ultimately became one of the industry gold standards for special effects now.
Yeah.
And revolutionary. I mean, the shot, like when you see the shuttle pod turn around and you have rear projection of Scotty and Kirk in there, composited in. That's amazing at the time. Like, that film set standards that we still use. I mean, obviously it's dated now, but the format and the methods are still very similar to what we do today.
And it holds up from a special effects perspective.
Totally.
I mean, totally flawless, right? Totally flawless. I mean,
have you seen? I'm sure you've seen the 4K remaster.
Yeah.
It's stunning. It's gorgeous.
Amazing. It's glorious. Absolutely glorious. Although I could be wrong here. I don't believe that remaster is available digitally. I mean, on a disc yet. Can you get it on disc?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I need to get the disc.
Yeah,
I don't have the disc yet, but I did watch it on Paramount Plus when it came out, or was it CBS All Access at the time, whatever the streaming service was. But I did watch it on that, absolutely. Couple of other things about Strange New Worlds. We get a Spock ear joke right in the episode, which is always glorious. And I'm a little obsessed about the giant fire pit in Pike's quarters. What's that about? Seems a little dangerous, a little risky.
Maybe it's holographic.
maybe. But I also just want to do a little shout out to I don't know what her official title is. I don't think they actually give a name in the episode, but the Kylie Planet Queen, or whatever it is, with her plum suit and her big gold egg.
Yeah.
I mean, that costume and hair and makeup was just chef's kiss.
I think that there's a really interesting, we talked earlier about being able to tell a narrative of current times in space that you couldn't get away with. I think it's very interesting the way that the news reporters on that planet were used in there to, like, hey, the aliens are here now. It was very interesting, the news footage that was incorporated into the, like, establishing shots used when they went down to the planet.
Yeah, if I was to have one critique of the episode, I think it goes to something that we talked about earlier, which is, and I don't remember if this was in the pre-show discussion or if this actually is something that's going to make it into the episode, but I was talking about one of the strengths, I think, of sci-fi in general is that it allows us to tell these stories that are sort of unencumbered by the trappings of modern day. And, so if you go back to a story like, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, right? It's a little bit bonk on the head, right? It's a very obvious sort of story. But, if you were to tell that story like in a modern context, it'd be a little too obvious, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that this episode maybe went a little too much with the modern context. I think they could have stepped off it a little bit, and I think it would have gone down easier for a lot of people. But I don't know.
It was very it was the nudge, wink, wink. Know what I mean? Know what I mean? Know what I mean? Kind of bit of.
It's a little too much.
I agree with that. I get what they were doing, but I agree it was a little like, hey, look what we're commenting on. Hey.
Yeah. And so that kind of goes against what I was thinking is, one of the best things about sci-fi, right? Is that you can really tell the pure morality story without having to beat people over the heads. So
right.
I'm not trying to rewrite the episode or anything. I'm just giving my reactions to it. People can agree or disagree with it, and that's okay. But for me, it was a little bit too much. Okay, Rob, we've talked about some TNG, we've talked about some modern Trek, but now I think it's time to go OG, and let's talk about a TOS episode, The Corbomite Maneuver, which in official numbering is Season 1, Episode 2. Here, of course, we have crazy man-child Baylock, we have the Fesarius and the First Federation, and it's very early in Star Trek's run, and certainly a favorite on the show and a favorite among Star Trek fans. But what about this episode is special to you?
I really liked that this episode of the original series is kind of the first time we really see that Kirk's playing chess when everyone else is playing. I mean, it's even said in the episode. It's the chess game versus the poker game. And I really like that he's at the end of his wits. He has no ability to fight this enemy at the time. He has no sticks left in his bag. And he says, I'm going to make up this thing that's going to either work and scare this guy and he's going to leave me alone, or it's going to be what finishes us. We're finished already, so who cares? And I love that right before he pulls this maneuver, he gets on the comm and he says, we all have an irrational fear of the unknown. There's no such thing as the unknown, just things that are temporarily hidden. And that is like, I mean, if you could boil Trek into one sentence, that's it. Like this idea that we'll figure everything out because that's what we do. I think, wasn't it Will Rogers that was like, there's no unknown neighbors, just people I haven't met yet. It's very similar, like that whole, everything's explorable. We just haven't gotten there yet. And I really think that's a great, like, little tidbit of Trekness. I also really like the way the episode was shot. There's a lot of, I mean, I think the season was kind of still figuring itself out.
Oh, yeah.
So you saw a lot of like POV handheld camera that we don't really see very much on Star Trek.
And her in a gold uniform.
Yeah. And her in a gold uniform. You get the writer that they chose for the episode, Jerry Soule, was Hitchcock in Outer Limits before Star Trek. So there's a really cool kind of like, you could see kind of some Outer Limits-ness to the episode. And the director they chose was Joseph Sargent, who did the original Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3. So I think the style of the show has a real urgency to it that we don't always see in the original series. And I really like the episode for the story. I like the episode that we see a lot of character development in both Spock and Kirk. And you see the way kind of his management. And Bailey. Like you even see a lot of his management style with how he dealt with Bailey. And he like gave him a chance. And then he was like, get off my bridge. Like, you clearly aren't getting it, man. And then when Bailey like has a moment to go to timeout, and comes back and realizes what he did, Kirk's like,
he put him in timeout.
He did. He goes, go to your room. He said,
get off the bridge and think about what you did.
Yeah. Go stand in the corner. And then when you're ready, we're going to go over to that ship and you're going to see why we're all out here. And I think that's a cool, like, insight to what Kirk was as a manager.
You know, one of the great things I liked is the fact that when they go over there, they have the very low ceilings.
Yeah.
Right? Because the ship is not designed for beings of our size. And so often, even in Star Trek, especially in a lot of Star Trek, like everybody is sort of the same size and looks kind of the same, like with a little bit different face, you know? So it was really great early in the run to see Star Trek really acknowledge the fact that, you know, an alien would have a very different enclosure, you know, how they choose to live and what their living spaces would be like. You know, it's just a little thing that I noticed that I really enjoyed about this one.
Well, and the fact that the transporter saw that, like, and Scotty says, hey, it reads pretty short over there. You guys better duck.
Yeah. Which is just was a great thing, you know. And that's the kind of stuff I like about a lot of the sci-fi shows, and in particular this particular episode of Star Trek. And this one, I would say, is an episode that really, really benefited from the remastering.
Oh yeah,
because the Fesarius just has a whole nother level.
Giant Christmas tree bulb.
Yeah, it's one thing when they say there's a giant ship out there and they kind of talk about it, but you really got to see the scope of the thing, you know, and our wee little Starship Enterprise in comparison to it, in a way that I don't think the original series effects really delivered. So I thought it was just glorious.
Yeah, and the cube looked awesome in the remaster. Like, you even saw some of the shots where they would take a shot back from the view screen looking back at the people in the ship and the light was reflecting off them, but you didn't see that you didn't see like the thing generating that in the original series because they couldn't do it, but they had the light on their face. And so now when you see the cube spinning on the view screen, and then when they take the exterior shots and the light's reflecting off the nacelles and off the front of the dish, it looks really cool. The remaster did a nice job with that episode. You're right.
Oh, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that, because I did look at some of the original effects, but it was more on the Fesarius itself. The cube part, I didn't actually look at in the original effects.
So yeah, if you go back and
I gotta go
You'll
check
see
that
it
out.
reflecting nicely off the ship.
Well, Rob, I've enjoyed our conversation.
So have I.
It's been a lot of fun. We've talked about the fact that you working in TV, you have a particular point of view and the ability to analyze some of these episodes in a way that those of us who are not on the inside don't have the ability to do. We've talked about why some of these episodes have been very powerful for you. But the M5 is now signaling me that it is time for the Kobayashi Maru lightning round. The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready, Rob Hedrick, to face the Kobayashi Maru?
Do I need to go get my apple?
Yes, you can get your app. M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Rob's responses.
Kobayashi Maru programmed and ready.
Cuteness factor overload. Is it the Cation orphan kitten from Prodigy or Lorca's Tribble from Discovery?
Lorca's Tribble.
Worst surprise for your away team. The crystalline entity, Dreadnought, or Gorn hatchlings?
Gorn hatchlings.
Make your own Star Trek Freaky Friday. Who are we going to body swap for the day? Uhura and Scotty, Riker and LaForge, or Bashir and O'Brien?
Bashir and O'Brien.
Which dead one-shot captain do we miss the most? Captain Garrett, Captain Robau, or Captain Esteban?
Oh, Captain Esteban for sure.
Choose your favorite Picard line from these. The sky's the limit. The line must be drawn here. The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth. And finally, it is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not weakness, that is life.
That for sure.
Number 4, it's possible to commit no
Yeah.
mistakes? Okay, fantastic. Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
Rob, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks, M5.
One does not thank the M5. Thanking is for humans, not for multitronic units.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little show. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Rob Hedrick is awarded the title of Orbital Weather Control Officer for the planet Hesperia.
So there you go.
That's amazing.
So I guess the M5 determined that you're a little bit of a weather nerd, Rob.
That seems fitting since my first TV job was a storm chaser.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Rob, please tell people how they can get in touch with you, how they can continue the conversation, and where they can find all your various projects.
If you just look on any social media, Rob TV LA.
Rob, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your cheerful correspondence of commendation, your critical communiques of censure, or selfie videos of yourself trying to befriend an angry targ to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be sold for latinum in the great marketplace on Ferenginar. Some portions of the Kobayashi Maru lightning round questions in this very episode were written by listener Adam Sanders. I encourage every one of you to send me your ideas for questions, and I thank Adam for his many contributions to the show. This time, I leave you with a quote from Lieutenant Commander Data, who in the episode Starship Mine said, quote, "Beverly, have you noticed that the mean temperature here on Arcaria is slightly higher than normal for human comfort levels? I have found that most humans prefer a body temperature of 21 degrees Celsius in order to operate most efficiently. However, there are several cultures who actually prefer that their body temperature is identical to the temperature of the room in which they are standing. The Shellyak, for example, ... Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Some friends keep texting me and they're like, we should do a podcast about this. We should do a podcast about this. I'm like, if you're willing to edit it all, yes, sure.
Yeah, well, you know, I did a thing when I was part of a podcast network. My day job is I'm in corporate training and development. So I have a whole team of new hire trainers that report to me, and I deal with all the people who are coming into my company and teaching them our stuff, you know, everything from the computer to product and all that. And so that's something I can do. And when I was part of the network, they wanted me to run some classes for new podcasters, right, on how to, you know, figure out what your podcast is going to be. And I played them 2 YouTube videos. One was a EDM video. And if you were to look at that in the editing rack, you know, like the raw audition file, it would probably have like 37 tracks.
Yeah.
You know, and there's not one little peep that is not electronically processed that wasn't intentionally put there. And then I compared it against this guy who was a street performer in Berlin. And he was rapping in the subway. And this woman comes up to him and says, hey, can I sing with you? And they just did this amazing collaboration in the subway. Like, he's got his audio kit hooked up to car batteries with jumper cables. There's echo. The audio sucks. And it's raw and beautiful. And there's like people walking by and there's all these other sounds. But it's like, that's all the part of the charm of it.
Yeah.
And so you can do either one of these as your show. You just have to decide what you're going to do, you know, and if you're going to just put out that raw audio, you just have to acknowledge that, you know, we're only going to cut something if it's like going to get us canceled. You know? Yeah,
exactly.
Just go with it.
Well, it's crazy too. Like, I do a bunch of corporate commercials and I hate in a meeting with the client and they're like, we want it to be organic. And I'm like, nobody's going to pick up your product in the middle of whatever they're doing and be like, oh, this is amazing. I can't believe I get to consume this while I'm here doing my other thing. It's like, organic is forced. You can't say, I hate that word so much.
I don't feel the need to just do something because I wanted to do it. Sorry, I'm talking way too much. This is rude to invite somebody on and do all the talking.
No, I was in news for 100 years, so I'm always fascinated. Like, everyone's process is why I'm so fascinated with storytelling is, again, I think that's honestly why I like Star Trek, is because I like the storytelling method of it.
Yeah.
So I love hearing other people's process and what got them to where they are. And I feel like that's kind of like the, you know, not to steal another franchise's term, but that's kind of like the dark side of Star Trek, is that it's so ingrained in people's childhood and their experience and their hobby that they get to that point of like, this is Star Trek. This is how I like it. You can't like it different from me. It's like, come on, man. That's why this is art. Art is so subjective that it changes for everyone, and you can't tell someone else how to have their experience.
And your point of view was like, they didn't understand the episode. And it's like, no, they understood it just fine.
Right. It resonated with them in a different way it resonated with you, and that's just how it is.
Yeah. So I think that unique ability, and I don't know how unique it is, but I can just say that I find it uncommon among hardcore lifer fans like myself to just like let it be. Enables me to do a show like this, you know, to have people that I literally have nothing in common with as far as their experience with the show.
Off and on, you know, I try and keep Trek kind of to myself, especially in dating life, because you never know like how that's going to be reacted to with other people.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I catch an episode of Star Trek and, you know, the person I'm dating at the time will be sitting next to me and reading a book or something while I'm watching it. And she'll look up and go, that's a really good story. It's like, yeah, that's what Star Trek's about. Star Trek's a place to tell stories. It's not about the Star Trek, it's about the storytelling mechanism. And she goes, well, now I kind of see why you like this. I was like, yeah, it's not just for nerds. You become a nerd because you like it. You don't like it because you're a nerd.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think that's one of the powers I think that sci-fi uniquely has. And fantasy too, to some lesser extent, I think, although there's a lot of tropes wrapped up in fantasy. But one of the things about sci-fi in general is that it divorces you as a creator from like all the trappings of our current place. So if you're going to do a story in modern America, right, you've got, if you want to do a political story, you have to have Republicans, Democrats, and that comes with all the baggage of that, right? Whereas you can be like, no, I'm going to set this story 500 years in the future, and we're going to call them Neptunians, and we're going to call them Saturnanians, and they're two political parties in disagreement, and we don't know what the nature of the disagreement is, but they hate each other, and here's the story, right? And so you can sort of remove a lot of the context that we have and tell like a true powerful story that's really about the core of something without dragging in all this other baggage.
Right, and that's ultimately what Gene Roddenberry knew in the start was, hey, I want to tell these really politically charged stories. I want to tell these things that are like the third rail of television, but I can't do it on the streets of San Francisco or the cop stories that I used to write. Let me put it in space so I can tell these stories, and then the people don't realize what I'm really doing until it's too late.
When the episode drops, I will, of course, be tweeting out the polls for the Kobayashi Maru, so you can choose to interact in that if any of my
I'm going to find that clip of Captain Esteban and post it.
You should. For you,
hopefully it's pretty quiet.
It should be. And you can see I'm in the closet. I'm literally in the closet.
I have a rack of gear sitting over here, and I have a sound panel sitting right in front of it, so it keeps it quiet. Nice.
Well, these are my wife's clothes and shoes.
Hey, I always tell, like, when my team needs to record a VO, I'm like, go in the closet.
And then at the top of every episode, I usually recap one of the previous ones to say, okay, before we jump into my interview with Rob, let's talk about the Kobayashi Maru from episode 65 with Bonnie, and we go through what her response was versus the Twitter poll. And I always think a successful Kobayashi Maru is when they never match up.
Yeah.
I never want like everyone to pick answer A, or whatever it is. Like that to me was not a good question. So, and occasionally my listeners submit questions. So you are going to get some questions that have been written by a listener. So I just wanted to let you know that. So that's always kind of fun.
That's next on my list, is to find a convention and probably go to it either this year or next.
I can say this is something very timely that you bring up, Rob. This is actually a very hot topic right now in the Star Trek community as we're recording this in January 2023. The reason is because a company called Creation, which is based in Glendale, California, not too far from you, they were actually the license holder for Star Trek conventions, officially licensed by Paramount/CBS. And they ran the STLV convention until about 2 years ago. They lost the license to a company called ReedPop. And ReedPop, are you familiar with them? Do you know them at all?
Yep.
Okay. So ReedPop ran a convention, I want to say about 3-4 years ago. I'm going off memory here. The exact dates don't matter, but it was a little while ago, called Mission New York. They ran that. And then they ran an event a couple of years ago called Mission Chicago. And they were supposed to run Mission Seattle in May of this year, 5 months from now as we record this. And then not just about, I want to say maybe 30, 45, 60 days ago, somewhere within there, they canceled it and provided no explanation. So, and they're the only convention license holder right now. And so for 2023, there are no officially licensed Star Trek conventions.
Wow.
The only officially licensed Star Trek meeting of any kind is the Star Trek Cruise, which is happening the end of next month, which I will be on.
Oh, nice.
But the Star Trek Cruise has typically, and this is like the sixth one they've done, has typically offered a pre-booking discount if you book for next year before you get on the ship. And they have not, as of right now, done that.
Oh, interesting.
And so there's a debate, very timely in the fandom, like, is CBS pulling back from licensing live events?
Or are they going to try and do it themselves?
Which, well, I will just say, for me, I don't understand why they would want to get out of the licensing business, because literally they do the license and then they sit back and collect money and don't have to do anything. Yeah,
that's interesting.
If they want to do it themselves, that's like a whole nother bag of hurt, right? Where they got to set it up and it's a lot of work, and sometimes people like to bag on Creation convention, for this, that, or the other thing. But I'd say, what, they have successfully put on a convention for many, many, many years. And that is no small feat when you look at what's involved in putting on an event for that many people. and dealing with all the things you have to do to put on something like that.
It's interesting because I think that 22 is the first year that CBS and Paramount were officially back together. So I wonder if that had anything to do with them trying to reassess their licensing of outward properties.
Like one thing I was really enraptured with when they first built it, now it's kind of old news, but when Celine originally came to Vegas all those years ago, shows you how long I've been married that I'm telling this story. The background of the Caesars Coliseum it might still be, I don't know, I'd have to look it up, but at the time it was the world's largest plasma TV.
Oh, wow.
It was 3 stories tall.
Wow.
And it has a door in the middle that she would come out of. And it was one single panel, with this door built in. Stuff like that. Like that was
cool.
Like wildly cool. And that's the stuff I was interested in. And in fact, one year, her company, for some event, I don't recall what it was, but they arranged an employee event where we watched movies in there on that.
Oh, that's awesome.
3 stories tall plasma TV. And it was like a work event, for funsies. And I was like loving that,
Yeah, that's cool.
This is amazing. So all those technical details really thrill me, like how they do the sound and, looking at the sound booth and all the stuff going on in there. I mean, I know just a little bit, because of this podcasting stuff about how audio works, but nothing professional. I'm a novice at this stuff. But I just loved looking at all that and, what is this guy doing? And, what are all these different screens? And, that I just nerd out over that stuff like an idiot.
I do too, and I get paid for it, which is cool.
Good for you, man. You're living the dream.
It is. I have that moment at work and I go, wow, I get to play with all these really cool toys and get paid. That's cool.
So I'll tell you a funny story. Okay. So this is this is the kind of stuff that goes in the bonus material. So before my current job, I spent 7 years working for, and I ran learning and development for them. And which meant, I was the training guy, right? So that's like important to understand this story. So one of the things that happened was every year they did this special, like without going into too many details because it doesn't matter, it's beyond the scope, but they had this like special all employee meeting. And it was always like a big deal when they did this meeting. And they wanted to make it a special event, right? They just didn't want people sitting in like the auditorium in the office. So they would typically like rent a venue and have like a lunch, I mean, it wasn't like some super fancy thing, but they wanted to make this a special thing. One year they rented out the Smith Center here in town, which if you're familiar with it, right, it's like this sort of 1920s Art Deco venue. It's incredibly beautiful. It's really spectacular. And they rented out the Jazz Cabaret Suite, and they were going to stream the event to the colleagues that couldn't be here in locally in Vegas, right? And one year something happened with the stream and it was a disaster, and they lost the stream and it was a problem, and I don't know all the details of what that was. The next year, for some reason that has never been adequately explained to me, it became my responsibility to be in charge of all of this for next year. And I was like, I'm the training guy. Why am I in charge of any of this? But it came to pass. So we did a test stream. We had cameras in there, and I'm in the control room of the Cabaret Jazz, a place I'm sure you'd be familiar with what that would look like. And I'm in there while they're doing all this testing and, switching cameras. And there's this guy like calling it, camera 2, camera 4, camera 5. And I'm just like, how did I end up here? Like this is like, I am completely in the wrong place right now. And any minute now, like someone's going to walk in and be like, what are you doing here? Get out. It was like the worst case of imposter syndrome, rightfully, I might add, I have ever experienced. And the only thing I ever wanted to say to the big boss, his name was Steve. And I want to say, Steve, if anything goes wrong with this stream, this live stream of this event, I just want you to know that everything that could have possibly been done had been done in advance. So any amount of testing, any amount of anything, it has all been done. And if anything goes sideways, bring your wrath upon me like the Eye of Sauron. But there was no thing I could have done that was not done.
But that's one of the cool, I think that's kind of like, I always call live TV the drug, because you can make all the preps in the world. And again, like you said, check 1,000 things. And one of those 1,001 things could be what does it. And then in the moment, oh, I got to figure out how to reroute around this and get it up and working again without anybody noticing. I think that's the cool drug that makes live TV so much fun.
Yeah, well, somebody trips over a cable and pulls a cable out of a rack and, the internet goes down. That's not something you're going to recover from right away.
Yeah, or AWS pushes a code plug that now all the streaming in the world doesn't work during your event.
Oh, it sounds like that actually happened to you.
It did. It did happen once.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, that'll all be in the bonus material for my listeners. Well, I might have to bleep a couple things, but there you go.
I think so. Yeah, Television
that's
City.
The same as The Price is Right. I think it's run by the same people.
It is. I just don't remember if Let's Make a Deal might be over at the Radford lot. I don't know if it's at TV City.
Okay. The only reason I ask is because I was on Let's Make a Deal on the Star Trek, the Star Trek one.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, which unfortunately is not available anywhere on streaming.
Did you have to was it a fenced-in area like in Beverly Hills, and you had to wait outside to be brought in?
Well, they took us. There was two parts of it. They took us to an office building, is where we were told to report to, and it was somewhere near Van Nuys in
that's Radford
sketch neighborhood. And but then they put us in buses and they took us to the studio, which was someplace else, and they took us there. We didn't go there. They took us in buses. So that
was probably the Radford lot. That's the other CBS facility. That's where there's another half dozen stages up there, and that's where the Big Brother house is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we had no knowledge because we didn't have to figure out where we were, and they took all of our, if I remember right, they took all our devices.
Yeah.
And they checked everything in. So we had no idea where we were except to say it was, someplace in LA. And
right.
Yeah. So yeah, I had if anyone out there had seen that episode, you'd remember me because I was in a black and white checkered outfit.
Oh, nice.
So let me start that again. I always begin by saying so, and it's something I always end up cutting in post. So I'm just going to try to start a sentence for once in my life without saying so. So. The Kobayashi. I wish this was video because I wish I could have recorded your face right there.
Insert surprised look here.
Which dead one-shot captain do we miss the most? Captain Garrett, Captain Robau, or Captain Esteban?
Oh, Captain Esteban for sure.
Yeah, you are not going to get anywhere with that answer, my bro. Breaking my own rules here. All right, I'm going to cut that out. I think I will tell you right now, I am going to predict that in the Twitter poll, Captain Esteban will be the absolute loser.
Absolutely. But there's a line from when he goes, oh, wait, hold on. We don't know what we're talking about here. I think that's just one of the best line deliveries ever in Star Trek from a one-shot captain.
Oh, wow. I will tell you right now, I think the Twitter poll, I could be wrong. I think the Twitter poll is going to come out Captain Garrett by a lot.
For sure.
And then Captain Robau will be a second, although he would be my vote if I was voting on this because
Which one was Robau?
From the opening of 2009.
Oh, right. Yeah. The one that went over and got speared.
Yeah, got speared. I was totally enraptured with him, and when he died immediately, I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
I'm told there are some good novels and stuff with more Captain Robau in it. So yeah, because I really liked it. I was like, this guy has got big brass balls, right?
Oh yeah.
Going over to the other ship, and I just loved the whole opening of 2009. To me, it's funny. We were talking about TMP, and one of the things I try to explain to some of the younger fans, especially people who came to Star Trek, in the modern era, is that Star Trek ended in 1969.
Yeah.
And we sort of had the animated series, which, you can count or not, but there was nothing until 79.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And when we go in there and you sit down in the theater and that blue cloud comes up with the Klingons, and I always tell this story, I didn't know that they were Klingons because we didn't know what that was.
Oh, that's right.
I'm like, who were these dudes who stole that Klingon ship? That was literally 10-year-old me.
That's
was
right.
Who are these guys who stole the Klingon ship and why are they in there? But just that whole weirdness with them speaking that other language and the blue cloud with the crazy music, that the experience of that in the movie theater for a fan at that point was something that was unparalleled.
Did you have when you heard the Jerry Goldsmith, the logo notes that we now know as the Star Trek theme, when you heard that the first time at the start of the movie, were you like, yeah, that's it. That's Star Trek? Or did it take like the whole movie to set in?
Well, this is going to be something that people, especially younger people, will not appreciate, which is at the time, the movie didn't start with the movie.
Yeah, it had the overture, right?
And you had an overture that was playing, and it was a very different set of music. It's been a while since I've listened to it, but I don't think it actually had a lot of that. It was
no, the Ilias theme didn't have any of it. But
Yeah,
the first, like, the minute that the head titles came on, it was that da 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 da.
Yeah, and I was here for it. I mean, I connected to it immediately. I was completely on board with it. I was like, let's go.
That's cool. That's got to
You know?
be such a cool, like, feeling to have been there for that.
Yeah, and the reason I brought this up is because that whole beginning of 2009 was very evocative of that. In that Star Trek was over at the end of Enterprise, season 4.
Yeah.
And there was nothing from 2004. I think it was 2004 when it went on the air. Could be wrong about that. Don't hold me to it. But then we get the 2009 film, and just the idea that I'm sitting in the movie and I was like, I was told this was dead. Like, I was told it was all over. And then we get like the Kelvin, and it looked very modern, and we have Captain Robau, and I'm like, who's this guy? What's going on? I'm excited. Show me what's going to happen, and I was totally on board for it. And I'm like, they killed the guy.
Yeah.
So it had this, I always compare and contrast those experiences for me, because it's just a very memorable set of experiences in my fandom, is sitting in the 2009 film and then the TMP as a kid. And sort of, thinking like Star Trek was over and getting the movie back. And I mean, it's one thing when you knew the movie was coming out, so you intellectually know it, but it's another thing to experience it.
Star Trek 6 was my first in-movie Trek experience. And when Praxis exploded, I was like, yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, and you get the Excelsior with Captain Sulu.
Yep.
And, that you can buy those that teacup that he's got.
Oh, really?
Yeah, those are
awesome.
available. You can buy those. Yeah, people have them. So which is fantastic.
But then we have to have Tuvok make his tea blend for it, right?
I always ask my guests about their rewatch, and my rewatching of Star Trek is such a mess because I only watch Star Trek really for 2 reasons right now. One is for prep for this show, so my guests tell me what we're going to watch. I'm not picking those, right? So it's the guest. And I've been doing a disciplined rewatch over the last few years in order.
Oh, wow.
In an order. So I started with TOS. I did TNG. I did Deep Space Nine. I did Voyager. And all the new stuff I've watched as it's come out. I did animated series, all that. So I'm right now like very close to the end of Enterprise Season 4. And I'm finding it hard to finish.
Yeah.
Because I know where I was in life when Enterprise was on TV, and I know for a fact that I was watching it, but it was in broadcast, and I was traveling for work at the time. So it's possible I may have missed an episode here or there. It's possible. It's unlikely, but it's possible. Once I finish season 4 of Enterprise, like, I know 100% certainty that I've seen it all. I'm kind of hoping that there's an episode I haven't seen yet. And it's a completely irrational hope, and there's no reason I couldn't like bang through the last like 4 episodes, but I live tweet them as I watch them.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, people can go back if they are listening to this. You can go back in my Twitter and you can see my reactions, and I'm really live tweeting it in real time as I'm watching them. So you are getting like my hot takes and snarky comments and funny, stupid, or terrible observations as they're happening, without any editing. So it is really that.
That Enterprise episode when Trip goes out on the grappler to reboot the ship. Oh, that's one of my favorite Enterprise episodes.
There's so many, and I give Enterprise a lot of grief for like the repetitive food scenes.
Yeah.
One of my constant drum beats as I rewatch is that whoever I know who it is, but the people that were in charge of the food got more billing on the show than like Travis. There's more food in the show than Travis Mayweather, and I was like, this is not correct.
But they probably did a little tip of the cap when they had Riker play chef at the end, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. These are the Voyages, which that one I'm pretty sure I have not watched since original broadcast. So
wow.
I know I've seen it. But I have not seen it since original broadcast. I know the episode Bound, there was that one came up on Trek Profile, so I had to rewatch that one. And I know I've seen the Terra Prime ones, the Mirror Universe ones. Those are also in there. But whatever other ones are in that last little bit of season 4, I may not have seen. At least that's a vain hope that I have.
That's exciting. That'd be cool.
So we'll see. Maybe I should do something for the end of my grand rewatch. But I do have a plan for here on out. Once I finish this grand rewatch, I will continue to live tweet. But here's going to be the rules. I don't think I've announced this anywhere. So this might be a first. I might be breaking my own news, which is when I'm going to rewatch Star Trek. It will be an absolutely random episode chosen at random, and whatever is picked is what I'm going to watch. Even if it's a terrible episode or one that I hate, I will watch it and I will live tweet it.
Wow.
The whole time. So I'm going to watch other episodes, I'm sure, but when I'm going to live tweet, it's going to be a completely random pick, and it's going to be just whatever it is. So that'll be very exciting.
That's cool.
And I don't think I'm going to do a disciplined rewatch from here on out. It's going to be all random. But that was like for getting video, right? Like you weren't a meteorologist or anything.
No, I chased storms and reported on them live as they happened.
So you were that guy standing there on a raincoat, like on the windswept pier as the hurricane was about to blow people out to sea.
That was me.
Oh my goodness! What was your worst experience doing that? I have to ask now.
So I was in rural Oklahoma, a city called Visay, and it was nighttime. But the storm was we usually didn't chase at night, but if the storm was pretty big and doing damage, we'd chase. And I'd made friends with the other TV stations. I was at an ABC affiliate. I'd made friends with the other stations, and we were talking over our two-way radio, and we're sitting across a road from each other, and we know the tornado's probably maybe a half mile away down the road, so we're waiting for it to come near us so we can see it, because you had to look in the lightning. This trooper car comes tearing in front of us, and we don't want to go down this road because we know the tornado's like down that road somewhere.
Okay.
Trooper goes down the road. 10 minutes goes by. Trooper comes tearing out of there. Has 2x4s, roofing shingles, windshields broken out, cars damaged, and he's just tearing ass. And then this black cloud comes behind him. And I'm probably 200 yards from this other truck that's facing me, and I'm facing it. And this black cloud just blacks out between us and goes by. So the tornado literally just crossed the road right in front of us. And I was like, we need to leave.
But you had to call the station and be like, you're not getting your live shot.
I did. I was like, the tornado literally just passed 100 yards in front of us. We're backing out of here.
Oh my God. Oh, that's
the best though was wild. My reporter, and I chased with this reporter for 1,000 years, Jordan. And he looks at me, he goes, what was that? I was like, that's the tornado.
So do you remember what the planet Hesperia was? Did you remember that reference? It's okay if you didn't, I'll tell you.
So if I'm right, it's going to make me scared. That's the one that they use the trajector in Voyager to go to. No.
It's the planet of Ren Fair people from Lower Decks.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. That's amazing.
So I sometimes I literally am 12 years old, so I put these things in there to amuse myself. Boom diggity, we're done. Was that okay for you?
That was awesome.
Oh, good. Well, it's always important to me my guest has a good experience on the show.
That was really great.
I want to make sure it's always a fun time.
Yeah.
You invite people on, you're never sure how it's going to go, so I appreciate that.
No, it was a good time.